Hey folks, welcome to Unsung Podcast. I'm Mark.
I'm Chris.
How you doing, Chris?
I'm alright. This is something a wee bit different. We've not done one of these in a while. This is a town hall. Usually with town halls we take questions from our audience, but this time there are just so many hot topics kicking around in the same vein that I thought, Mark, we should do a town hall Festival Fever special edition.
And that we are doing.
Yeah, but before we get to that, I understand you have been in Eastern Europe getting some weapons training.
Yeah, just in case the Russians decide to really take it seriously.
Which Russians? There's so many to worry about now. So many factions.
Yeah. Oh, there is, yeah. Probably primarily, and from their point of view, maybe the Belarusian Russians.
Well, you know what? I think most people that follow this podcast know I follow this stuff fairly closely, right? And I suspect really that at the heart of this, there is simply a lack of material for good action films, right? They're trying to extend the Taken franchise, because this week, basically what we've done, we've taken 25,000 heavily armed, trained convicts and put them in a country with an inept dictator in charge. And basically we're just going to have,
see what happens,
maybe a few decades worth of good material on human trafficking, gangs, guns, inter-gang wars, organised crime families from Belarus. It's going to be fertile territory for a lot of action heroes. Maybe Mission Impossible 7 could be based there. Yeah, that kind of thing. I mean, it's pretty considerate of them overall. You know, I was in Krakow for a stag do, and we were shooting guns on the Saturday, which was the day when Prishoga decided he was going to try and take Moscow, which failed really quickly, bizarrely, and then all was forgiven, which is absolutely baffling. So I remember the morning of my pal Callum, who is he's a politics and history lecturer, and he fucking loves history and politics, and he's really tuned into this shit which is going on just now as well, and we were talking about it in the morning. It's like, mate, this is fucking mental. And I was like, yeah, it's just as well we're going to go shoot some guns and learn how to do it, just in case the shit. A few steps ahead.
This part of the world, you know what I mean? So it was kind of nice timing.
You're not the only people in Poland dusting off and cleaning out their old fucking weapons.
Yeah. So they get stag do's all the time. You can get a stag package if your stag's over 7 people, but we only had 6, so we just booked it the normal way. And they were the 2 most humorless guys I've ever met, even by Polish standards, in my entire life. But they took it very fucking seriously indeed.
It's a serious business being Polish.
Yeah, and yeah, very much so. So it was fun. We all got breathalyzed before it.
Aye?
Yeah.
Wow.
And we decided to have a couple of pints before we went. As soon as I learned that we were going to get breathalyzed, the guy basically walked in, "You've been drinking?" And we were like, "Yeah, a little bit." He's like, "Okay," and then pulls out a breathalyzed and goes, "Green good, red no." And we're like, "Okay." So
did they fail?
Yes.
And that ruined it for them.
It ruined it for the fittest guy. It didn't ruin it for the unfit guy. And I was like, hold his drink.
Wow, okay.
Which was staggering.
I mean, the thing is as well, if Poland does end up getting brought into conflict, the Russians are going to be drunk anyway, aren't they? So.
Yeah, totally. So the Polish fucking love vodka. It's going to be some rammy.
Come on, you want to make this realistic? We should be getting drunk before we fire the guns. But yeah, it's been a weird week for that stuff. And let's not kid ourselves, man. I mean, Putin basically said to that guy Lukashenko, "Here, you're taking them. I don't want them in my country because they're just going to start gangs." And he's like, "Oh, what do I get?" And he's like, "Oh, you can tell everyone you fixed it for a couple of days." That's basically the deal we got, right?
Yeah. There's some top class trolling by the CIA going on just now as well, so they knew about it in advance, implicating higher level officials. Man, that's brilliant.
I like how they all just absolutely sat it out. They were like, "We're not giving him the excuse to blame this on us." I mean, he tried anyway, but they're just like, "Everybody stand back, nobody touch it, don't give him any excuse to say that this is our fault." But fuck, man, the boys still tried to make it work, didn't they?
They even phoned them and said, "By the way, it's not us." And they were like, "Alright, cool,
we're going to say it's you anyway, is that okay?" I mean, our people will believe anything now, so yeah, okay, quite a week. But in amongst all the fun and games in Eastern Europe, there was fun and games going on in the festival scene up and down the UK. It was a big weekend for Glastonbury that had a few talking points, which clearly pale in comparison to the importance of what's going on in the aforementioned conflict. But there were some others as well, and it just seemed like anybody that follows us on Twitter just now will know that we've brought a few of these up across the last week or so. But yeah, we thought, why not just group them all together and do a bit of a town hall, just some of the key points that have been coming up for the last couple of weeks. in and around the issue of festivals and just burn through them. So that's what we've done. Before we do that, I suppose a little bit of due diligence. If you want to hear a bonus episode, an unsong about Total Eclipse of the Heart by Bonnie Tyler, then you still have time to sign up to our lowest tier if you want. I mean, you can join the record club. The record club's great, but sign up to the lowest tier if you just want to get the bonus content.
Yeah.
And there's a load more in there as well, more so than just that one episode. But that one episode alone, trust me, it's worth it. It's a belter. Loads of Jim Steinman, some vampire musicals, general nonsense.
It's great. It's a really one of the most fun ones that we've done.
Yep.
If you regularly check our feeds and you're a fan, and you'll have come across the concept before, but this one is extra jovial, shall we say?
And extra long as well.
It's extra long. Yeah.
There's no shortage of things to say about it. But yeah, so regarding this festival stuff, I actually intended to come to this episode without any notes, Mark, and as you can see, I've absolutely failed to that end, and I'm starting to think I might have a problem. I can't turn up for a podcast without horribly over preparing.
Yeah, I didn't do any notes, and now you're making me look bad, so thanks for that, man.
So part of my notes, I kind of got into a wee bit of a deep dive, right, and I found this website, and it's called Viber8, and they've released a festival report 2022, which I thought was actually really interesting, and so I've gleaned some of the more salient details from it to save you reading through the whole thing. But basically they analysed 330 festivals from around the globe to try and coalesce some useful statistics of what might be going on. So I'll go through them before we get into the questions, because it's quite interesting, some of the things that it shines a light on, and also, you know, it's useful to have some of your preconceptions challenged, because this did actually surprise me in a few ways. I will say one thing I'm going to talk about a lot is Glastonbury, because it was a big weekend. A lot of things came from that. This actually told me that the first Glastonbury happened in 1970. It was £1 a ticket, and there were 1,500 people. How cute is that?
Yeah, a little hippie festival in the 70s, you know.
It's like it's 3/4 of the barras. And then in 2022, which by the way is not this year, and I suspect the crowd was even bigger, anybody looking at the Elton John performance probably agrees, but 2022 it was 200,000 people, and tickets started at £335 plus booking fee.
Yeah, you can only book for the whole weekend. You can't book a day ticket, so you've got to go the whole thing. It's a big commitment, really.
Aye, it is. It's a big jump, and we'll come back to the finances of that. I will say it's not the biggest festival on the go. Primavera gets 500,000 over 2 weekends, which is probably about to get bigger because they're about to expand to Madrid and Barcelona. And Coachella gets 750,000 over 2 weekends.
Yeah. Coachella's probably the biggest festival.
I think it is the biggest one, yeah. So just some stats here. In 2022, the average festival earned $10.7 million from ticket sales. Now that's actually kind of a slightly useless statistic unless you're just comparing it year upon year, because that includes festivals from down at like less than 5,000 people all the way up to these mega 80,000 plus events that are like certain categories that they use. Clearly Coachella is well above even that at 750,000. The breakdown was roughly as follows. Small festivals, that's sub 5,000 people, was 302,000 profit. Medium festivals, 1.9 million. Big festivals, 5.6 million. Huge festivals, which I believe was like over 50,000, was 12.8. And mega was anything over 80,000, that's 54 million profit on average, which is probably less than I expect. And see, when you look at the valuations of some of these companies, I realise that company valuations is a very, very complicated business. For example, the valuation of the company behind Primavera looks incredibly low given the size of what that thing represents. So I am not an accountancy expert. I cannot possibly imagine the many, many ways in which the money is divvied up and where these numbers come from. But there is clearly a lot of money changing hands. Quite
interesting, that, isn't it? Because I would have expected the turnover of these festivals to be a lot more, because I guess like your Guns N' Roses and your Elton John from Glasto this year, I mean, what do you think their guarantee is going to be? It's going to be at least $1 million, right? I mean, well in excess of that. Yeah, at least, I mean, right.
When Green Day played, or almost played in Glasgow last time, I think it was 1 or 1.5 million.
Yeah, I mean, Prince was $1 million, famously $1 million.
And turnover will be massively in excess of that, but also the costs will be very, very high as well.
Yeah, but you got to think that some of the lower artists in the bill aren't getting paid as well as they should be.
That is something that we're going to come to, because that's a complaint that a lot of them have, that they're not making any money from it. I do think we should also point out, though, that artists saying they're not getting paid X amount or sufficiently is one thing, but as anybody that works in music and claims royalties and things like that will know, artist payment from certain shows can be dwarfed by the revenue from the likes of PRS. So you can have bands playing at the Barras and getting like literally £50 to £100 cash, but then scooping up £800 easily following that from their PRS royalties. So it's not really as simple as a band going, oh, they only give me 200 quid and it cost me 220 quid to get here. It's like, yeah, I'm not saying 200 quid's fair or not fair, but artists pleading poverty in some scenarios are maybe not telling you the full story, because there are other revenue streams within that can be quite lucrative.
Yeah, I mean, do artists generally tend to charge more for playing festival slots? I mean, production is bigger and stuff like that. So
I mean, I can name at least one Scandinavian kind of post-metal doom band that I've had dealings with, whose, I think their concert fee was about 2,500-3,000 and their festival fee was 10.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's a massive jump.
That's very interesting, isn't it?
Yeah. So yeah, another interesting thing about this is that stats show that small festivals do not expect growth in the next year. So they're asked to forecast, and the smaller ones really don't see there being a lot of growth in terms of ticket sales and overall revenue, or at least in terms of profit. What is markedly different is that the big festivals all expect big rises in their profit consistently. So there's a widening gap there. The small festivals are to some extent struggling, and the big festivals are prospering quite a bit and expecting to continue to grow. Primavera expanding to multiple cities, Glastonbury getting bigger and bigger and bigger each year, adding other stages, so on.
Well, before the pandemic, festivals were falling out the calendar anyway because the organisers couldn't afford to keep them going.
85% of festivals got cancelled in 2020. I know that. Yeah,
but I mean, there was a downward turn before that. Sonosphere being a really big example of a bigger rock festival, which actually would do it across Europe and not just in Britain. But the British one was just canned. And they still do it in some places in Europe. Well,
actually, that's also interesting because we've got some demographic splits in different territories, which might shine a light in that. You'd actually mentioned before we first spoke about doing this about social media, and I found a statistic that actually said that 68% of festival organisers say they are basing their bookings partly or substantially on online statistics and social media trends.
You're doing that as well, aren't you, when you're booking bands, right?
That's all I do.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just book the top 10. That's it.
So I can give a little bit of further context to that. Is one of the guys I was on a stag with, Liam, I don't know if he's listening. He works for a...
Not drunk when firing a gun.
Not drunk when firing a gun. Just drunk at all other times. He works for a big radio company, conglomerate in the UK. And obviously the one
that... you sleep well at night, Liam.
I mean, he's just moved to that. He actually worked in independent radio for a long, long time, but he kind of felt as though he'd hit a career ceiling. But I mean, that's a decision to make, I guess. More security, I suppose. He says that obviously, like, one of the things that radio stations want to do is like they want to bring in younger audiences, right? First of all, what they're doing for DJs is they're usually looking at influencers with big numbers, people that already have an audience, making them DJs, and then counting on that audience. Or a lot of the time they'll be playing songs on the radio.
Why have we not been approached then?
Well, they're not. Well,
we're incredibly influential.
We are, yes. But one of the things they're also doing is like a lot of their playlists are kind of for commercial stations, not so much the BBC, because they'll play anything and that's good. That's why the BBC radio is pretty good, because they've got a lot of stations, they'll play a lot of different things which a commercial radio just will not touch. A lot of the songs they're playing are just what's big in TikTok just now, or big in media and in sync. A good example of an old song is obviously Running Up That Hill.
Good point.
From Stranger Things, but mostly whatever's big in TikTok is what's getting played in the radio just now. So social media drives a large part of that industry, and all of the music industry. So it's really not surprising to think that 68%, that figure, I mean, that doesn't surprise me in the slightest.
What is interesting is, though, that a quarter said they do not consult online stats at all. Whether or not that's entirely true, I guess we can sort of take it with a pinch of salt, that maybe they somewhat consult them or are aware of them, but they're not basing it on that. And there's also quite likely a kind of old guard of bookers in there that just refuse to change their methods. It's like, oh, it's just how I've always done it. And maybe certain genres aren't as dependent on that. You know, the folk festivals and stuff like that as well, maybe they're not as reliant on that.
Yeah.
But what is certain is that the availability of music data analytics is meant it's increasingly being used to reduce the level of financial risk in terms of booking, you know, versus sales and returns. So the more sophisticated the software, the aggregators of all this data from all around the world, it's not like you can beat the bookies, but you can certainly bet on fairly safe horses that are going to turn certain amounts. You know, it's like getting an actor into a film. You know the stats, you know how their films perform. Well, this guy doesn't get the biggest numbers, but he's a safe pair of hands. So we might not make as much as a breakout hit, but we will certainly be very unlikely to lose X. So a lot of the bills are also kind of being determined by that. And that is totally analytics driven. Bookings by genre, this was really interesting. So they actually ended up analysing 9,651 booked artists at these 330 festivals that they covered. 36.3% were electronic, 16% were rock, 12.7% pop, only 11.5% hip hop, only 5% metal, which I found quite surprising, 3% country and 2% punk. The rest, the odds made up things like folk and kind of more esoteric genres and stuff like that. European acts accounted for over 70% of all the electronic bookings, and this is interesting. Rock acts mostly come from the USA, 33.8%, and the UK, 25%. So a quarter of rock acts come from the UK. Remember that, because we'll come back to that. Non-male acts and mixed gender bands only make up 24 of the 100 most booked artists. The most booked acts. Now, I sent you a name earlier on because I just felt a wee bit mischievous. I was like, Mark, please listen to this before the show tonight. So, of the electronic acts in 2022, the most booked was someone called Timmy Trumpet, an Australian guy, an absolute shit show, like nightmare fuel, frankly. Absolute nightmare fuel. Did you have a wee listen?
I did not, sorry.
You're fucking lucky bastard you didn't listen.
Timmy, play your trumpet, let the people go
berserk. It is utterly fucking hellish. Hellish. Like the donkiest, stinkiest, bottom of the barrel, like club music with a guy who occasionally plays a trumpet and just has a face you would not tire a punch. To the floor. Tell me, where the freaks at? Tell me, where the freaks at? I'm guessing Craig's very familiar with this guy. Big in Australia. So he was the most booked electronic act of 2022. With indie, that was quite interesting. It turned out that Fontaines DC and Turnstile are the most booked bands.
My friend Sally says she knows you got a funny point of view. Says you've got away with murder. Maybe one time, maybe two. Big a little room, I wanna bring you from the bottom, I wanna celebrate. Close enough to feel, now it's time to disappear, I wanna celebrate. So I can never feel the cold.
Turnstile, a punk band, so that's interesting.
Those two bands were joint first. Idols were second. A band called Grandson were third.
Yeah, another moment passed. Look at how we both grown up fast. Think about it and I get whiplash. Think about it and I get whiplash. Keep moving, don't know what towards. Not the same as it was before. Don't know how I'm gonna take much more. Don't know how I'm gonna take.
Maneskin, that fucking monstrosity, were fourth. Inhaler, Gorillaz, Wolf Alice, King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard, and Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds all came in between 13 and 15. In pop music, Glass Animals were the top in 2022.
Sometimes all I think about is you. Late nights in the middle of June. Heat waves been faking me out. Can't make you happier now. Sometimes all I think about is you.
Girl in Red was second. Girl in Red's an interesting one because Girl in Red we actually spoke about in the White Town episode. She's a bedroom project from, I think, Norway, who became really, really successful. She made a lot of festivals last year. Bia Dadubi, do you know them?
I've never heard of them.
They're getting booked all over the place.
Finding the right words to use for this song. I have you in mind, so it won't take so long. Life is that.
And Phoebe Bridgers as well was in the top 4 of
She is class, to be fair.
hip hop. Megan Thee Stallion is at the very top of the hip hop ranking. She played 25 of the biggest festivals, and she was also the most booked individual artist overall from any genre of 2022.
Dear fuck nigga, still can't believe I used to fuck with you. Poppin' playing bees cause I ain't playing to be stuck with you. Damn, I see you still kick it with them op bitches. I'm the only reason that your goofy ass got bitches. All them hoes wanna look like me, bitch most likely.
That's TikTok, baby.
It's interesting though that only 24 of the top 100 were female or mixed, yet she's the top of the pile. Somebody called Jack Harlow was second.
Home for the holidays. My friend pulled me to the side like, did you hear about Marcus? Our Marcus? Yeah, our Marcus. A bunch of girls say he raped him in the back of some Target. They say he drove him back there in his car and then he parked.
Little Sims third, and then there was people like ASAP Rocky, Princess Nokia, who Dave had on this show 5 years ago or something like that, ahead of the curve. Polo G, Channel 13, Ashniko, C Tangana.
Otro poema y moriríais por mí. Moriríais por mí. Reviviríais la leyenda por mí. Moriríais por mí. Reviviríais la leyenda por mí. Moriríais por mí.
Oh, I always feel like I'm reading out the credits list at the end of a bad movie when I do that. Festival proportion by genre. The US is the biggest festival hotspot with 76 of the 330 top festivals that were analysed by that group. Most of them are electronic, followed by hip-hop, 16 of them pop. The US is also the only country music festival hotspot in the world. There are exceptions, but obviously it's the main one. This was what I thought was really interesting. The UK is the second biggest festival hotspot, and the main genre is pop, not indie. It's totally biased in favour of pop music in the UK. When you see it represented, they've got various visual kind of representations of this. You realise how disproportionate our fixation on pop festivals is, especially when you then go back to the fact that the UK provides 25% of the world's current festival gigging rock bands. And so when you're talking about Sonosphere and stuff like that, it seems to be that there isn't as much room in the UK market for big rock and punk and metal festivals compared to other countries. We are mired in pop festivals. Almost half of them are pop festivals in this country. And so I thought those stats were quite interesting. I wouldn't have thought that about the UK. I would have thought we were a really indie heavy country for that, but no, apparently not.
I wonder what the class is a pop festival. Transmit? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, the lines will be blurry. It'll be where the predominant bias lands. You know, so there will be, I mean, Transmit does have rock acts on it, but the bill may have 30 overtly pop projects and then 6 rock acts, but it's a pop festival. Likewise, you'll have hip-hop performers on at Glastonbury, loads of them, but they're not making up the bulk of the programming. Yeah. And Glastonbury's probably quite... I would say Glastonbury's an indie festival. I'm guessing it's an indie festival. But yeah, we seem to have a fascination with pop festivals here.
It's very interesting.
So yeah, I guess with all that data out of the way, it kind of brings us on to the talking points. They're not really in any particular order, but the first one I wanted to bring up, now this might not mean a lot to people from outside the UK. In fact, it might not mean a lot to people from outside of Scotland, but it
might not mean a lot of people in Scotland either.
Possibly. But it's relevant. So Down the Rabbit Hole was a festival in central Scotland. It actually began in a little town called Doon, which is really close to where I grew up, and it sort of moved around as so many festivals do. It has rolled up its affairs
multiple
times, but very publicly 2 weeks ago. And basically what's happened is that Down the Rabbit Hole has sold thousands and thousands of tickets for this year, has folded and released a statement blaming a union called BECTU, which is the performance arts union, and advised people who'd bought tickets to go and speak to their bank or their credit card companies about getting a refund, that it wouldn't be coming from the festival.
Why?
The festival claims that is because it was forced to spend the money that came in from tickets in advance, and so therefore there is no money left with which to refund the purchasers of tickets. Now, Down the Rabbit Hole has had a consistent pattern of debt for years. They've had rollovers on tickets, people losing money. Some blame is attributed to overly ambitious booking at the festival, going for names that ultimately the ticket sales didn't justify, because it used to be a very bespoke, very kind of family orientated festival, and it expanded to bring in much bigger acts, bands like Slayford Mods and stuff started showing face at it, and there were some concerns about that. It doesn't help as well, I'd imagine, that it's run by a guy called Craig Murray. Now, Craig Murray was actually, I think, in jail this time last year. He's the guy who exposed the identities of the woman who had alleged sexual assault against Alex Salmond. And
former First Minister of Scotland, just for people who don't know.
Alex Salmond, pretty forgettable human being. But Craig Murray was kind of embroiled in that. He was embroiled in a number of things. He was also caught messaging John Sweeney, the war correspondent, who's in Ukraine, funnily enough, offering to send them loads of money back in February 2022 when the war broke out. So a strange thing. I think Murray's dad was perhaps a war correspondent, and that's something to do with the relationship there. But really odd guy, quite an outspoken guy. He obviously says, we did everything here to try and help the music scene. Everything we've done was with the best of intentions. The union fucked us by insisting that we pay our bills. Bear in mind, there are years worth of people that haven't been paid, including the acts. And I think a big part of it this year was that a lot of the acts insisted on getting paid up front, and then a lot of the service providers insisted on getting paid up front, and therefore they're claiming that the money they paid up front from the tickets, now that they've folded, that money's gone, so they can't refund the punters. Who knows? But I mean, the company was effectively rolled up previously and just seemed to be set up again by the same people in a slightly different name. It's not the only festival to have that happen to it. So in the UK alone, we had Temples, which was quite a high profile one. That was kind of like much edgier, hardcore and stuff. I know, for example, that the band Converge, who played at Temples, never got paid by Temples.
Oh, wow.
Or at least the last time I spoke to them, they hadn't. If that's the case now, feel free to get in touch. And you also had Ultimorous Parties. Ultimorous Parties was a kind of series of festivals that would take place in these holiday camps, and then also they would have some inner city things in the likes of London, and it was always very edgy. It would be curated by Shellac or Mogwai or Sonic Youth. It would get somebody to curate it and pick the lineup. Even people like Stuart Lee and Matt Groening curated lineups for that festival. But ultimately it seemed that they were also doing that thing where they were trying to sell tickets for next year to pay debts that had been hanging about for years, and they were running out of road. And again, that folded. One of my good friends, Jason, who was in a band at the time, had bought tickets for the next one and then lost that money. They folded and the money vanished, and that was it.
It's like a pyramid scheme. So basically you keep bringing more people on board to give you money, to pay the people that you owe money to, and eventually you just, like you say, you run out of road.
Yeah.
Probably not deliberately or maliciously done in the case of these festivals, but the tactics seem weirdly similar.
Well, the only way you could recover from that is if you expected growth, because otherwise you would constantly be chasing debt. So you would have to predict festival growth so that, for example, let's say 2 years later, you would make 120% of what you made previously, and therefore could put some into the debt and some to, start to recover. But the thing is, as that study showed, the small festivals aren't growing. So they're offsetting future sales against the debt, but yet they must know that there is no indicator that they're going to grow those sales or profits, and therefore all you're doing is kicking the can down the road. And in fact, it seems like it's actually accumulating the longer you go, the debt. Not to mention the bad reputation, not to mention the disruption to bands and performers, and let's remember all the people that work there, because that's one of the big things. Like, the people that work there were getting fucked out of money because they're not the ones with a huge platform. If U2 doesn't get paid, you hear about it. U2 have got plenty of outlets and places to complain, but if you're working at a bar for 5 days cleaning up sick and helping people into ambulances and stuff, and then you don't get paid either, who do you tell? People are just like, well, too bad.
Yeah. It seems to me it's probably a case of them probably projecting growth and business plans in order to get money to run that festival, but then never really quite getting there because the acts maybe are more expensive than they'd hoped, or there's insurance to pay, or they've not calculated their overheads correctly, or something like that. I mean, there will be, I'm sure there's a reason that there's some bad maths involved somewhere.
Yeah.
But to do it multiple times,
it's kind of like chasing a bet, isn't it?
Yeah.
Oh, I just need another loan to get myself right. I can feel I've got a big win coming. It's like, but the big win wasn't coming.
Yeah.
And that's multiple festivals now that have gone the same way in the UK. Down the rabbit hole, as I say, for years now, people have been a bit sceptical about the finances of it. And it it felt like the most predictable thing in the world when I saw that announcement. I
mean, it sucks. It must suck for the people that run it as well. I mean, I don't think they're probably not horrible people, right? We'd like to think.
The people that book it are definitely not horrible people. I know that, the people that were trying to put on acts, but it's very speculative, isn't it?
Well, I guess, yeah.
The people that lose, I mean, okay, the bands lose a lot of money, but the people working there, the folk that provided services, the joiners and the fucking people taking your shit away and, you know, all that stuff, like, if they don't get paid, there's no recourse. They're just fucked. That's it. Anyway, Glastonbury, let's look at that for a second. So I've written Glastonbury class and its problematic new age issues at the top of my notes here. I think probably the first thing that is worth mentioning, and I know you'd kind of brought this up as well, is Glastonbury middle class?
Yes, that always been.
That's sort of the perception, right? It's the middle class festival. Yeah,
I mean, it becomes a pseudo-city, doesn't it, really, for that whole 3 days, 4 days, whatever. You very rarely see working class acts playing it as well, but we've spoken about this before. Maybe it's been more than since COVID, because a lot more acts are working class.
I would think that might just be the fact, though, that so few high profile acts like charting acts are working class. I mean, we've covered that before. I mean, even way back in the early 2000s, at one point it was something like 84% of acts had a private education versus 17% of the population who did a private education. So I think you could probably make a case that Glastonbury was actually given a fair representation of the charts, and it's simply the fact that there is a dearth of working class people in music that is showing up when you look at that bill.
Yeah. I think £340 a ticket is quite expensive.
Plus booking fee.
Plus, I know you can pay these up, and you can let Ticketmaster let you pay it in X amount of installments and stuff, and that's really good for a lot of people, particularly working class people who just don't have that kind of money lying around to spend immediately. But the way that it's pitched, the ticket price, you just know who it's for, really, right? Ultimately.
I mean, it
tells you half the story at least.
See, the thing is, I don't want to strawman them, and if they were here, I think they would probably point out that, for example, Kiss at the Hydro is nigh on £150 a ticket.
Yeah, but that's not for working class people either, then.
Well, there you go. But that scales up. So if you're going to see dozens and dozens of bands, including like Elton,
it does make sense. The guarantees are going to, the fee needs to be high to justify the guarantees.
And to them it makes sense as well when they're articulating it. They're going, oh well, Kiss is £150, so you're saying Elton John, Arctic Monkeys and Guns N' Roses for £340. I think that's very fair. And it's like, well, when you put it like that, it is, except £150 isn't fair to fucking start with, let's be honest. And £340 plus all the costs of getting there, plus all the costs of staying there for 3 and 4 days. There's a lot of overheads to that. There are a lot of other costs in there. It's a huge undertaking per person. It's a fucking huge undertaking.
Yeah, that's just for the regular camping. If you want to have a little bit more, then you're going to have to pay more for better camping and where you stay on site. And
it's funny you say that, because I've got a statistic about Primavera that will make your fucking toenails curl. It is frightening.
So yeah, I mean, you're right, we shouldn't straw man it, and in certain senses it will be a value, because I guess you're also getting the experience of being at the festival, and all the independent traders are at Glastonbury, unlike a lot of other places, you know. I think there is like actually places that traders can go up and like actually sell their wares and all that, you know. It's I mean, it does feel as though it's more like a city, you know. There's various different things to do at any time of day, and things to buy and places to see and things and all that. It's, the actual festival itself, I don't know anybody that's ever actually went, I don't think.
I know a few people that went this year. I know from booking that a lot of people I was speaking to about shows in Glasgow were like, oh, I'm sorry, I can't go this year, I'm actually going to Glastonbury. And I was like, wow, this is more than I remember, you know, in terms of receiving that answer in past years. It seemed like there were quite a few people down there. Now, you mentioned traders, independent traders. Actually, for me, one of the things that puts me off, I've never been to Glastonbury and I don't see myself going, is that some of those traders, actually, let's call them peddlers. Let's look at a wee bit at what they're peddling, because I personally fucking hate festivals with that air of new age being at a festival and going by palm reading tents and crystal tents and psychics and mad shite. I hate it. And Glastonbury is the king of that. It is absolutely part of the branding, the acid tie-dye sort of thing. Somerset is the UK's, in fact, I think it's potentially Europe's, but it's certainly the UK's capital for pagan and New Age movements. I mean, if you go there, if you go around the villages, if you go into Glastonbury itself, let alone the surrounding villages, there are so many organisations and groups and little quasi-religions and sects and retreats and meditation groups and health spas with very dubious methodologies and beliefs.
That aspect of it doesn't bother me so much because you're going to get that everywhere you go.
But Glastonbury, it's so built into the brand, though.
Yeah, it totally is, and you can take it or leave it, I suppose, when you go there. I don't think anyone's going to get their mind changed when they're there. You would sensible people, anyway.
Yeah, I don't know, man. I don't know if I'm as optimistic as you about that.
Yeah, well, I'm never going to go either, so it's totally irrelevant to me.
Sticking with Glastonbury, we'll get to a list of a few interesting takeaway points, but I think a couple of these deserve going into in a little bit more detail. And the first one I want to look at, again, I'm not sure how many people will be familiar with it, but feel free to go up and have a look at it online, is Billy No Mates and her poor reception and the ensuing fuss about that.
No is the greatest resistance. No to your nothing existence. No is a walk, no small talk. No, I don't think it looks better.
So this was one of the topics that reverberated across the weekend of Glastonbury. So Billy No Mates, her real name is Tor Maries. She is an alternative musician, I think is probably the best way to describe it. I think she's from Leicester, but I think she's based in and around Bristol. She played on Friday at Glastonbury, and basically she performed along the backing track. She did a sort of self-karaoke thing. It was just her, very normally dressed, shoeless, dancing about on an empty stage to her tracks and singing. I will say, singing really pretty well, given how much dancing she was doing.
If such an iffy ambition, why's got the better of you? If you really wanna go, then I don't think you should stay here. It's been a pleasure.
The performance was poorly received overall. Now, there were people there that are huge fans. Billy No Mates already has a sort of fairly solid fan base, but it met with a lot of criticism, right? Now, I want to, first of all, preempt this by saying I have no axe to grind against Billy No Mates whatsoever. I think she's fine. I don't think she's great, but I definitely don't think she's bad. I think some of the songs themselves are actually really pretty decent. I watched the performance. Given what she was doing, she did a good job of it, given that she went on stage herself with absolutely no production value really at all. That was actually kind of bold, and she sort of executed it, I think, reasonably well, but I think it was really just the decision to do that really rubbed people up the wrong way. She's since requested that the BBC remove all of the footage from all of their platforms. Now, they haven't actually done that because you can still go on, for example, YouTube and watch it. She also released a statement in light of all of the negative feedback saying, I know it's not for everyone what I do. I know lots of people don't rate me, but the level of personal abuse on that public page is too much. There will be no more shows after this summer. You wouldn't stay in a workplace that did this to you. Why should I? So she's basically announcing her intention to quit on the back of the criticism she received. And that doesn't entirely add up to me for a number of reasons. I think my initial reaction was sort of kind of compassionate, but the more I sort of sat in it and thought about it, the more a lot of questions and doubts started bubbling up about that. Performing and having a negative reception to a performance in front of a fucking enormous crowd of very diverse tastes is not the same as working in an abusive office environment or an abusive school environment or an abusive anything environment. It's different. There's a performance aspect.
It's a false dichotomy.
Yeah, it's a false dichotomy. The abuse is obviously utterly pish-patter. Nobody is fucking condoning that. Nobody's saying, oh, come on, just get on it. Nobody's saying that, right? But the internet is full of that shit. That's a very redundant statement, but the internet is fucking full of that shit. any fucking video, anything is full of that shit, right? The level that she faced may well have been higher than normal, but I think that's partly because Glastonbury is higher profile than most things, especially around about that time. And is there a misogynist aspect? I'd frankly be fucking amazed if there wasn't a misogynist aspect, because it's the fucking internet, and that is not in any way seeking to excuse that as like, but misogyny on the internet is not fucking headline news. I think it absolutely needs to be called out. You absolutely need to make it clear that you think that's unacceptable, but this level of reaction to it and the way it's been portrayed, I mean, let's take another, maybe it's a slightly unfair dichotomy as well, but any band that's ever opened for Iron Maiden knows what it's fucking like to get a negative reception. There are bands that go on tours constantly knowing that their entire experience will be 95% of that crowd fucking heckling them and bottling them. I mean, Dillinger Escape Plan, for example, when they undertook the System of a Down tour way back, I would say those stats were probably accurate. 95% of that fucking crowd couldn't have wanted them to fuck off more. They weren't there to do that. They were there to get through to maybe the 5% of the crowd that were like, what's this? This is fucking pretty exciting. What the fuck is this? This is edgy as fuck. That was what Dillinger Escape Plan were doing that for. They weren't doing it for the 95, and they weren't doing it because they expected everybody to either like it or stand there quietly and politely and wait until they'd finished. They were up there being confrontational, doing something that was sort of challenging, and hoping that from that they would extract people that were open-minded, that were into something a bit more extreme, and take them on a journey forward with them as a band. And I think it actually worked really well for Dillinger Escape Plan doing that. From what I'm seeing from the reaction to the Billy No Mates thing, I'm not saying her specifically, but the people around her voicing all this concern, and it's a lot of people, seem to be looking for some kind of frictionless process. You know what I mean? Like, I would actually dispute the suggestion that Billy No Mates is groundbreaking in the first place, and that's not to say she's not good, but I don't think it's groundbreaking at all. But edgy or pioneering art is intended to be provocative. Surely that's the whole fucking point of it. Performing groundbreaking stuff will always carry a risk, and it's about breaking barriers, and it's more than that. It's about converting people. It's about rubbing up against people in a way that they're not comfortable with, and then maybe sort of winning some of them over. Fucking hell, Jesus Lizard, probably my favourite band in the world. The first record I bought by them, I took it back to the shop in disgust. I was like, what the fuck is this bullshit? American Psycho, one of my favourite books. First time I read it, I fucking threw it out because I thought it was so disgusting. You know, you're challenging people, and that's not always a very fucking pleasant experience. You know what I mean? Hostility and criticism, I think it's not just inevitable, but it's actually a function of that enterprise of doing something challenging and original and worthwhile. In terms of like people's knee-jerk response to this performer not having a band on stage, right, that is a pretty puerile fucking reaction, right? And nobody is saying that bands are necessary for an artist to seem valid or like good value. No serious person would claim that. I did stumble across a pretty interesting discussion specifically about the reaction to Billy No Mates, and it was on Gear News, you know, the website for like engineers and pedals and tech and stuff like that. A guy called Bob Malkowski of that site was interviewing a guy called Eric Morris, and Eric Morris is the guy that's in charge of the sort of backing tracks for Lady Gaga and Nicki Minaj and people like that. And Bob Malkowski was saying, for me, the Billy No Mates Glastonbury set was a bit of a watershed moment for the use of backing tracks. Up until that point, I feel there's always been some sort of distraction or smoke and mirrors surrounding the use of backing tracks live. There might be someone pretending to DJ on stage, or perhaps playing keys to give the illusion of a live musical performance, and yet Billy No Mates' performance was just tore on stage with just her songs, her vocal, and her performance to sell the show. And Eric replies, most artists are doing exactly the same thing, they just have more diversions and distractions, unquote, on the stage to hide that they are guilty of exactly what another artist has been torn down for.
Yeah.
And I actually think that represents a very good point, that she faced an opportunity to highlight how honest she was being, and that there's dozens of people at Glastonbury alone doing the exact same fucking thing, but pretending that they're not doing the exact same fucking thing. I've told you before how sceptical I am that Perturbator was performing live when I saw Perturbator, but the stage was covered in fucking synths, and Perturbator was certainly pretending to be playing those fucking synths.
Think about Kanye West and Kendrick Lamar. How was she received by the crowd at the time?
Lukewarm, I think. That some of them were really into it, but then again, she's not a major act. You know, when you watch the crowd for a number of those kind of acts at Glastonbury, the front 10 rows might be quite animated, and then the people at the back will be talking and occasionally clapping between songs and stuff. It wasn't a hellish reaction. Yeah. The hellish reaction seemed to be from viewers and stuff. I mean, the people at Glastonbury are in the sun and they've had a few jars and they're pretty cheerful anyway. So as I say, I think it's a missed opportunity to highlight the fact that she was really being pretty honest about the way she was going about that. Ian Brown, if you do remember, got absolutely fucking hammered for this about a year ago, because Ian Brown started touring his, like, you know, Stone Roses and his own stuff with just backing music and him on stage. And the videos were going viral of people just filming the show. Now, effectively, they were just filming exactly what Billy No Mates performed on stage, and the reaction was fucking hellish. It probably didn't have the air of misogyny that Billy No Mates had, for obvious reasons, but it was still a dreadful reaction to it. And funnily enough, the band Slayford Mods approved of Ian Brown's performance at the time. They came out saying that his vibe was always more hip-hop, and I think that's probably unsurprising given Slayford Mods' approach to performance, but they were really big commentators in this Billy No Mates thing. It was actually their reaction to it that sort of went the most viral, I think. So they'd said on Twitter, same old shit with the indie civvies, whatever that means. At that point, the finger at decent artists. The Billy No Mates set on the Park stage was the best from yesterday's selection, chaotic, original, and just tune after tune. Bands are fine, but some people just don't need the fucking things. Right, fair enough, but I would note that got 421 shares, more than 5,000 loves, and 650,000 views. Steve Albini tweeted on it as well. Regardless that performing alone in front of people who do not get it deserves infinite respect. Billy No Mates fucking rules, pearls before swine. Both of those tweets giving the impression that somehow there was some kind of dunce aspect to an audience that didn't enjoy what they were viewing. And you know what? That's probably the case in a lot of cases, but just because people don't appreciate someone dancing about doing karaoke doesn't mean they're fucking idiots. Because I don't appreciate Slayford Mods standing pressing spacebar. That's just a matter of taste. You can't fucking ad hominem attack people because they don't like something. We're not just talking about the people that maybe said really abusive things to her. They're just talking about people that don't get it, inverted commas. You don't get it, but you mean you just don't like it. I don't really like the tone of that criticism either. It's pretty easy, isn't it? So this became one of the takeaway stories of the festival, and the level of publicity on the back of it was astonishing. I mean, look at those numbers. The tweet from Slayford Mods, like I said, 650,000 views. The coverage was blanket across the platforms. All the news outlets, all the papers, all the fucking online music magazines, Louder Than War, to the BBC, to the fucking Daily Mail. Daily Mail, who is Billy No Mates and what happened to her at Glastonbury and all that. Everything covering it. Like, we're fucking adding to it now. We're adding to that blanket coverage. I very much doubt that any existing fans of hers have been put off. She played an okay set, and they already like her, and I'm sure they were alright with it. I would assume that quite a number of people have now been made aware of her who were not aware of her prior. The suggestion that she was going to quit music because of bad reviews and unpleasant online dialogue, to me, was astonishing. The other narrative, by the way, was how she was underpaid by Glastonbury. I think that's part of the reason that it wasn't a bigger performance. She was like, I can't afford to take people on for that kind of money. And you know what? Okay, fair enough. The amount of money that you get for that Glastonbury performance, you might say, right, that doesn't justify it. I just think it's quite interesting that so many people, the vast majority of people, never get a Glastonbury performance. The commodification of her victimhood here started to become like a wee bit depressing, and it's not just by her, it's by all the commentators around her, all the people like coming out and sort of kind of virtue signaling how concerned they were. I mean, I don't think she has an obligation to be anyone's champion, but it's definitely not inspiring, because as I say, the vast majority of people never get on that fucking stage, on any of those stages. And let's be honest, for Billy No Mates, her debut album was produced by Jeff Barrow. She's on Invader Records. BBC Six absolutely loved her from the start, and she only came out in 2020. She's been on Jules Holland already. She was barely off the pages of every fucking hip music blog and circular for like 24 months. She's guested with Sleaford Mods multiple times and enjoys clearly their ongoing advocacy, the advocacy of Steve Albini, the advocacy of Billy Bragg, the advocacy of like Edith Bowman and all these other musical commentators. Like, Billy, mate, music's working out pretty good, all things considered. Should you meekly accept all the online abuse? No, fuck no. Kick back by all means, call it out. But the sycophancy and things like that, it really didn't sit well with me. I just think it's been a really odd phenomenon to emerge from that festival. Someone gets criticised and they're threatening to quit their fucking profession. I don't get it. I just don't get it.
I don't really know if I went into that, to be honest, mate. Like, I didn't see the performance. I don't really know who she is. There's loads of people out there that definitely prefer or don't mind people way backing tracks playing live. Some big bands do it when they're playing with a band. You know what? It's your performance. You present it the way you present it to the public, and if they don't like it, then fuck them. I think maybe it's alright to be thin-skinned and vulnerable in a particular moment when you're getting torrents of online abuse. I don't think there's anything wrong with her particular reaction to that just now. Saying you're going to quit music maybe is a bit too rash, I think.
It's really, really hard to not be, bad actors looking to sort of misrepresent an argument are really affecting how we can even discuss this, right? Because nobody is I would never go on a fucking website and horrendously abuse someone. I would certainly fucking do a podcast where I'm like, Sleaford Mods are fucking shite and I can't believe they've made 7 albums. But I would never go and actually personally torment somebody on a website. It's inexcusable. And I'm forced to caveat that before saying also that I did a performance and loads of people didn't like it and they told me so. Yeah, loads of people didn't like it, but loads and loads of other people did like it, and loads of new people would like it. Just be fucking cool with that. You got to play Glastonbury. Congratulations. Your career's going really fucking well, considering you've not really been in the public eye more than 4 years, and you've already been on TV and festivals and all over the fucking magazines. Like, let's try and be a bit fucking optimistic about it.
I mean, I don't think there's anything wrong with her being vulnerable and feeling vulnerable in that moment. If you ask me, it actually adds to her narrative as an artist and her story as an artist. I think that can be quite compelling to a lot of people.
You think it's inspiring?
No, I don't think it's inspiring. I think it can be compelling for people to know that, this person's a human being and they have thoughts and feelings about things. And yeah, I mean, I do probably think she may have overreacted a little bit. And I'm not just saying that because she's a woman, by the way, in case anybody tries to take that tact. See, I'm caveating shit as well now.
This is why the podcast ends up being so long. Yeah, you have to pad it out with so many fucking caveats.
I mean, I think I would have reacted the same way if I was a single artist trying to do my best and feeling a wee bit ripped off by Glastonbury. Do you know what I mean?
So might I, but I think perhaps I'm more so critical now that I'm actually talking it through with you of the people around her who, rather than saying fuck the haters, doesn't matter.
Well, if your manager and your agent could certainly spin it,
and the bands and the media and the fucking onslaught of virtue signalling on social media. Why, instead of like slagging off people that don't get it, instead of suggesting that there's some kind of like normie fucking ignorance, why don't you just say like, you know what, fuck them, you were great, loads of people saw it, loads of people like you now, stick at it.
Yeah, I'm sure our streams are going to go up on Spotify.
Absolutely, man. I mean, honestly, like the fucking tag was trending.
It is that thinking which is making me go, well, I don't necessarily think our entire reactions is completely unjustified. Saying you're going to quit music, I think, is definitely an overstatement. Saying maybe I'm going to take a break for like 6 months, even then, I don't think that's a good idea. I would be right back in the road in 2-3 months' time with the exact same fucking show, filling the academy and being like, you know what? Fucking cunts actually love this.
None of those people that wrote that stuff need to be at your show. You don't need them there to be a success. No. You're already something of a success, and you're only going to get bigger on the back of this. Why the fuck is the reaction and the lesson to people, I got criticised online, therefore I'm going to quit, and you guys don't get it, you're too stupid to get it.
Yeah.
Point 4. Are festivals irrelevant for new acts, Mark?
It could be.
Point 5. You sent me some really interesting notes on this. Obviously, we'd spoken about nostalgia tours on previous episodes. In fact, we even did an episode on like ideal festival lineups, and yeah, the nostalgia thing is a big part of. Remember that statistic I said earlier about how Britain's obsessed with pop festivals? Well, these festivals are a big part of that statistic. Like these nostalgia fests, this fucking like D-Ream and the New Radicals and M People and that kind of stuff. That is actually accounting for a large part of that number. But you're right when you observe that a lot of the big festivals are now sort of doing that anyway. I mean, Glastonbury's always had these big headliners, right?
The Legends slot, right?
I
guess that sometimes over the last decade or so, they've had acts come in that are not obvious nostalgia plays. Kanye West,
Stormzy,
Kendrick Lamar, Stormzy. You know, Dave, I think was quite high profile. One of them as well.
And Beyonce and stuff as well.
Yeah, you know,
as much as I fucking can't stand her. Like, it's contemporary mega pop.
Yeah, I mean, the Arctic Monkeys are contemporary in as much as they've just released, I think they released an album last year. Have they got a new one coming out?
They released The Car last year.
Yeah.
Travel size champagne, cork pops, and we're sweeping for bugs. Some dusty apartment. What's it called?
But if you look at most rock festivals, for example, there'll be no new names on there that'll ever shock you. You know, nobody will be suddenly graduating to headliner. There'll be people that are working up the bills, and I think it's the same for most festivals. I think that they need to sell. We've just spoke earlier on about how they need to sell tickets. You know, that the cost, the margins are getting slimmer every single time, and the artists are going to be asking for more, particularly the bigger ones, because they're more sensible. You know what I mean? They know that they need more money to do their shit. You know what I mean? It just has to happen.
So see, going back to what you're talking about there, actually, Fontaines DC and Turnstile being the two most booked indie rock acts of the previous year, neither of those bands are main stage headlining bands. Do you see either of those? I mean, it's certainly Fontaines DC, decent band, but I do not see them, maybe I'll be wrong, but I do not see them as being a sort of legacy band in the future where they've built up such a catalogue of like mega hits that they can then go and replace, you know, Guns N' Roses or I mean, where is the next generation of that coming through?
Yeah, exactly. I guess that's the key question. You know, I think to answer the original question, I'm not entirely sure if festivals are irrelevant for newer acts, but I think the festival as we know it is probably becoming irrelevant in and of itself. The format that we have has got a shelf life. If these people are going to die sooner than the people that are underneath them, right in the bill, it's just going to happen. The format that as it exists is kind of mired in the past. It's mired in this old school formula of how a festival should be run, whereas the new music acts need to market themselves and promote themselves in vastly different ways from what the old acts used to do, which means they end up never attaining the escape velocity that's needed to become a huge act.
It's also about catalogue though as well.
Yeah, I mean, catalogue, that's what I was going to say. It was my next point. Like, some of the acts that have attained that escape velocity are Bring Me the Horizon, who are now in their 7th record.
Biffy Clyro,
who've done 6 or 7, I think. Ghost are probably coming up to that from a rock perspective.
I would say Muse,
yeah. I mean,
potentially.
Yeah. Muse became stadium fillers before they became headliners at festivals, which is, I think, is quite interesting.
Yeah.
But, you know, in America, they do it slightly differently than they do it here. You know, the examples that I'd given to you were Coachella had some of the biggest acts on Spotify in the world playing. Like Bad Bunny's only got 5 albums. The first couple were completely in Spanish. He's a massive crossover act in America. One of the biggest streamed acts in America.
He's the biggest Latin musician.
Biggest Latin musician in the world. Yep. But the few people like Frank Ocean, who did one weekend at Coachella this year, didn't do the next weekend. Blink-182 had to step in at the last minute to do it because he had technical issues the first time he did it, the first weekend. Only got 2 records. Blackpink, they're a Korean act, never fucking heard of them, only got 2 albums. And then we've got Sam Fender doing Transmit this year, who's also only got 2 records. So I guess there is some space for acts, but I mean, they've reached an escape velocity where they're so super massive that they can justify it, you know.
So what they're doing is they're rocketing up the lineups. They're just flying up to the top with 2 albums, 3 albums under their belts. But what they're not doing, I mean, this is one thing that watching Elton John underlined. I was like, there's no way Elton John can do a headline set for 2 fucking hours and still be doing hits. And you were like, holy fucking shit, he absolutely did. Like, he's got a lot of songs. I'm not a big Elton John fan. seems like a lovely guy. Don't really give a shit about most of his music, but fuck me, man, there were songs he didn't play, and I was like, what is going on here, man? This guy's got so many tunes. And I think when you look at the depth of the catalogues of some of these older acts, that's what I think's kind of missing. I'm not saying that some of the bands currently aren't as big in and of a moment, but there have been like hotshot bands all the way through history, but alongside them there have been bands slowly amassing massive catalogues, and there seems to be a lot less of that. I mean, the 1975, as a casual listener to pop music, I couldn't off the top of my head sing one of their songs. I would probably know a couple if I heard them, but then
Same.
they are really far up bills right now. Where are they going to be in like 25 years?
Yeah, I mean, there's maybe acts like that who may stick the course. We can ask the same question about bands in the 90s as well. I think commodification of music and music marketing has probably had quite a lot to do with
the thing is that bands like R.E.M. were still doing that big catalogue thing. I mean, Radiohead have done the big catalogue thing. U2 did the big catalogue thing. These bands could easily play for 2 hours and still be dropping tunes. There's a lot of other acts though that are really far up these bills, and I'm sure actually if you could go back to the 80s it was probably the same. You know, there are loads of big 1-hit and 2-hit wonders from that era, but I'm just not sure that I'm seeing the same amount of building towards the future. Like, if festivals are still working at this scale in 30 years time, who is going to be that granddad slot, you know?
Well, that kind of underlines the point I'm trying to make about how the festival itself is probably an out-of-date model. We've spoke about it earlier on. The music industry has now turned more and more towards artists with big hits. Younger listeners are listening to playlists, so they not really listen to albums. We've always said that, but it's even more apparent now in the streaming age. Some big artists, I guess, and TikTok and all that are not even going to be bothered about playing live, and if they are, they might even go the Billy No Mates route. And unless they keep churning out consistent hits, which I guess is possible for if you've got loads of money and you get to like a Rihanna level, there's going to become a point where there's loads of really great artists kicking about for a summer and then they're gone. Yeah. You can't sustain an entire festival season on a small group of acts. That's why I guess that's why these big festivals are chucking in the legacy acts, because there's like, well, there's not enough acts that have reached the level that we need to get to justify the cost of this ticket.
That was always my biggest criticism of Billie Eilish, was that what Billie Eilish came out doing, or what she and her brother came out doing, was interesting. But there was no point at which I got the sense that they were building towards a sustainable career. It was like, let's absolutely shoot this full of steroids as quick as possible, make as much as we can from it for a short time, and then it's very likely that it's just going to get dropped because it's very limited in terms of what it can actually do, in terms of the scope for growth musically and stuff like that. And that's just emblematic of an approach now. They're not really building towards it. We always, going all the way back, Prince Alarm used the example of Prince's manager saying that, you know, Warner spent an absolute fucking fortune on those first 3 albums just trying to develop this artist because they knew there was an entire career there waiting to happen, as opposed to drop them after one album. Right, they had one hit but get rid of them now. That's very short-sighted. You know, these bands sell records for decades. Queen sell records up the yin-yang for decades. ABBA sell records for decades. I find it very, very, very fucking hard to imagine that Billie Eilish will still be shifting, you know, 7 figures in 2050.
Well, it's just it's old mentality from the 90s on steroids now, isn't it? It is get millions of views on TikTok, get millions of streams within like 6 months if you're on a major, and we'll probably have you for another 6 months, maybe. You know, artists can do it themselves now, I guess, and I suppose a lot of these bedroom producer artists, if they don't sign any major labels, are never going to see a festival, because they're just never going to have the infrastructure around them to pull that kind of thing off. Yeah. Even if they might be rolling in it. To play festivals and to play big slots in festivals, you need to have production, which is expensive. So yeah, I guess the point I'm trying to make with that is I think that festivals are just becoming the land of the dinosaurs, with the occasional act which might be able to keep up potentially in future, maybe tacked on in different places with a whole bunch of new acts which will be here today, gone tomorrow. Maybe
2 hours and 3 hour sets will just become a thing of the past. The longest set, I think, in the history of Primavera was The Cure. I think they did 3 hours. So, you know, maybe bands like The Cure and that will become the thing of the past, and it'll just be like 40 minutes of Bad Bunny and then fucking 30 minutes of fucking whatever and 35 minutes of whatever, and just little fucking short sets with bands with small catalogues.
Maybe.
getting wheeled out. Okay, another one that's pretty relevant to Scotland. Transmit. We change attack here. I guess as folk in Glasgow prepare to go mental both at and about Transmit, because inner city festivals cause fucking chaos. But what is the overall picture here? So Transmit is effectively a reincarnation of Tea in the Park. This is for the folks out with here that don't know. Tea in the Park sort of started at Strathclyde Country Park.
Yep.
And then moved up to, was it
Balloch?
Balloch, yeah.
With Strathallan Castle after that.
Yeah, so they could terrorise all the fucking endangered birds of prey up
Well, in
there.
fact, they actually split into two festivals, didn't they? There was Transmit, and then there's Connect Festival as well, which they do over in Ingleton.
Yeah, that's
in
right.
Edinburgh.
Through in Edinburgh.
One for the rock and one for the pop, basically.
Yeah, well, Connect is sort of pitched at a slightly older demographic, whereas Transmit is very much like sort of 16 to 25, kind of Sam Fender types. Transmit is in the heart of the city. It really, really, really is right in the middle of the fucking city. And it is hedonism for a few days, let's be honest. But even as a fucking curmudgeonly, dour-faced bastard that I am, I had to kind of acknowledge some of the figures on it because they were pretty interesting. Now, the stats on this are pretty old, admittedly. They were from like 2017, 2018, which I think was like the first two of Transmit. But Scotland apparently saw the strongest growth in music tourism in the UK, rising from, I think it was 800,000 visitors in 17 to 1.1 million in 18, which is 38% increase. There were 100,000 attendees at Transmit for that one, I believe, which is a lot for a city like Glasgow, because Glasgow, as much as it's a high profile place with a big reputation, there's really, as far as I'm aware, during the night only about 600,000 now. It's not a big city. There's a lot of influx of people for work that then leave again and go to the sort of peripheral towns and stuff. I will say, I quoted this from the site, only London, the southeast and northwest of England actually brought more visitors to the country. To the country, I want to just put an asterisk there, because the UK is not a fucking country. Right? Scotland is a country, England is a country.
It's semantics.
I'm engaged in semantics, you're right. New festivals such as Summer Sessions, which obviously is in Glasgow, I think it was also in Edinburgh as well, wasn't it? Were credited with helping to attract growing numbers. But Summer Sessions was just passed, by the way, literally 2 nights ago. Guns N' Roses played. Prior to that, it was Arctic Monkeys and Muse. They had the 3 in a row at Bellahouston Park. So, I mean, there's absolutely no getting away from the fact that these festivals are generating a lot of money in and around the city. They also generate a lot of fucking chaos. So I don't want to be one of these people that's sort of saying, we just shouldn't do it because it's not worth the hassle. But I do think the people that run them are obviously making a lot of money from them, or trying to make a lot of money from them. Let's just say one example was Jeff Ellis, the head honcho at DF Concerts who run Transmit. This is a guy with a lot of fucking clout here. You know, DF Concerts has been a big news in Scottish music for a long time. Very well connected guy in the media and in the music industry.
Part owned by Live Nation.
So yeah, he used his clout to strongly complain about a £2.50 environmental levy that was added by Glasgow City Council, which was basically to fund up the clean-up operation following the festival. And Jeff was complaining that this £2.50 levy could threaten the success of the event. Bearing in mind that this is an event that 100,000 people in 2017-18 went to, it's probably more now. And this £2.50 thing was so objectionable. He was out there in sizable publications deriding that, saying that it was affecting the future of this thing. I mean, to be clear, tickets to Transmit for 3 days cost £200, or it's £85 a day. It's a £2.50 levy to help clean up the city. It was intended, I think, to raise about 650,000 to that end. Now, Transmit deflects criticism with the economics of that it adds 10 million purportedly to the local economy, which I don't dispute. It's a very, very big thing. It brings a lot of people to the hotels, you know, to the tourism sector especially, but only in certain areas. You know, one of those areas is the pockets of Jeff Ellis and DF Concerts, and other areas would include hotels, accommodation, the food and drinks industry, of which I'm part. And that's fair enough. Like, you see the benefits of it, you see the influx, and you see the people coming out after it, and a lot of places get a lot of extra cash, a lot of extra footfall. But the massive disruption in the cost of the cleanup and the repairs is felt by everyone, not just those benefiting it. So the cost of cleaning up Glasgow is not just paid for by the people who made money from Transmit. It's not like the bars and Jeff Ellis and DF Concerts and stuff all chip in and pay for these folk to go and clean it. It's fucking people that have absolutely nothing to do with the festival. It's people that get absolutely no benefit from the festival whatsoever. It's people that have their roads closed. It's people that are paying their fucking taxes, and a big chunk of those taxes are going to clean up the mess. Yes, it brings money into the city, but it's not like everybody gets an even share of that money that comes in. That money goes to certain areas of the city. And so for them to be so fucking resistant to things like a 250 levy to clean up an inner city festival, to me, just again represented how fucking self-interested a lot of these festivals and these people really are. I think it's very, very fucking selfish and short-sighted. People are lending you their city, all their transport infrastructure, which, by the way, is fucking chaotic in and around Transmit and in and around those kind of festivals. It
doesn't actually link up in this city to begin with, so it's fucking...
Exactly. You know. And then, you know what it's like getting a train from one of the fucking outskirts during that, right? Mm-hmm. It's fucking chaos. You are borrowing their city to make yourself a lot of money. Let's be honest, that's what's happening. Yes, there are other beneficiaries of that, but it's not equal. And I really, really dislike this attitude that somehow we should just be grateful and not expect there to be any sort of reciprocal arrangement. Oh, we're bringing all this money into your city. Well, it doesn't work as fucking simply as that, and you know that. It's very disingenuous, and there's to some extent an abuse of connection and contact and profile to then go out in the media and protest against this. Or you're threatening the future. That's a kind of blackmail. Or we might not run the festival anymore. We might take that 10 million away from your city because you're asking us to pick up our stuff. Don't like that, man. Don't like that attitude at all. We talked about Primavera. That's another big inner city festival. Primavera, by the way, started 2001, only had 8,000 attendees. It moved to that Parc del Forum in 2005, and by about 2022 it was 500,000 people over the 2 weekends. As we said, it's expanding to Madrid and Barcelona, so it's probably going to go up again.
It's already in Barcelona.
It's expanding across the two cities. Okay. Yeah, it's in Barcelona, but it's going to go to a double location. I think it used to have a Portuguese branch as well. I don't know if they still do that one. Anyone that went to it, I think last year in particular, was notorious because it was €3 for a can of water, and there was a 1 hour queue to try and get served.
I remember one of our regular listeners telling us about it.
Yeah. A lot of people noticed that the vibe around Primavera really started to change. It became very, very big, clearly, but also there was a tonal change in it, because it was always seen as being a bit of an alternative festival. That I kind of associated it with All Tomorrow's parties and things like that, the same kind of Nick Cave and Shellac, and right enough, Shellac I think I've played every single one. But in 2018 there started to be a tangible change, and there's a reason for that, because the Ukaipa companies, which is an American private equity firm, bought a 29% stake in Primavera Sound, and they kind of modified what the festival represented. And what you started to see was high street retailers, outlets next to stages, Mango and companies like that, shops started having these branches represented at the festival. And I mentioned there was an eye-watering statistic. In 2019 the highest priced ticket at Primavera Sound was €215. It's now 850. 850.
How do you even justify that?
Now, admittedly, there's much cheaper tickets than that, but 850 is the top tier when it used to be 215. That's fucking wild. It shows you how they have definitely targeted a different audience with it.
It's the Coachella effect.
Yeah, it's the stocks and shares investment banker crowd looking for their fancy holiday. And
great. Thoroughly depressing indeed.
I guess we could probably end on a couple of things that are a bit more upbeat. Just some of the standout moments from Glastonbury this year. Did you watch any of it?
Nope. I was in Krakow.
Aye. Well, there were some good bits.
I did see Paradise City with Dave Grohl, Guns N' Roses.
We will come on to that then, Mark.
I had a ticket for Guns N' Roses last year, and it got cancelled, and I decided to get a refund.
In typical Guns N' Roses style.
Yeah. The fact he even played in Glasgow this time was actually quite impressive.
It's very off-brand.
Yeah. His voice is fucked. The band can obviously still play, but yeah.
Yeah, we will come on to that in a moment. I would just say I was taken aback by how good Queens of the Stone Age were. I think a lot of people were taken aback by how good they were. I spoke to Ben Power. Ben was playing at Glastonbury with Editors. They did a really good set, actually. But Ben opted to break from the pack, who I went to see Elton John, and he went to see Queens of the Stone Age and says it's legitimately one of the best concerts he's probably ever seen. Got to admire Josh Holmes' ability to keep reforming these powerhouse bands around him. You know, John Theodore, Troy Van Leeuwen, that guy Mikey Shoes that they've got on bass. The set list, I would say, probably wasn't the best, but the performance was pretty spectacular. On a side note as well, I have to wonder, right, if you were not one of the people that went to see Queens of Stone Age, and you were not one of the what looked like 250,000 people that went to see Elton John, can you imagine being one of the people that went to see Alt J? Because they were playing at the same time.
Nice.
Fuck that for a job, by the way.
Hell of a
Fuck
clash.
Talking about Elton John, I was absolutely gobsmacked that he didn't perform Can You Feel the Love Tonight, because you think about what that performance is there to do, to get all these trolleyed people singing along in the twilight. It blew my mind. And even just the lyrics, Can You Feel the Love Tonight, it seems so tailor-made. I have to assume it's maybe a Disney licensing thing, because it would have been pitch perfect for it, but didn't actually do
You
it.
wrote it, so I'm surely you can perform it live, right?
I honestly can't. I feel like there must be some kind of reason that he didn't do it, because I can't imagine a better. I thought that would potentially be like the closing song. He did Candle in the Wind. He didn't do that.
Yeah, I have an interesting Elton John story, actually, which is kind of 3 stories in one. So you played in Glasgow and Edinburgh before you played in Glastonbury.
Went to the Denniston barbecue, I believe. Spent 600
I think
quid
his
on
band
drinks.
did. I don't know if he did. Did he go?
Did he not?
I don't know. That's not part of the story anyway, but I didn't know. So the biggest thing for me that I heard was that he likes to stay in the best hotels that he can, and unfortunately one Devonshire Gardens and Gleneagles and all the other ones were unavailable. But what was available was the Blythswood Hotel, Blythswood Square in Glasgow.
That's right, aye.
Which he doesn't like because it's too dark. So the floor that he stayed on, they went in and changed all the 20 watt LED light bulbs to 120 watt LED light bulbs in order to make it bright enough for him.
Wow.
And they also had a painter on standby to paint the brown bathroom white just for him. But when the new lights were put in, it was totally fine, so he didn't get his bathroom repainted.
Imagine looking at it from the outside. It must have seemed like poltergeist was happening upstairs.
But yeah, what a fucking bizarre thing to be like, we've got the painter on standby, you paint the toilet. The other interesting story I heard was that the person I heard this from was driving Elton.
You're driving Elton personally?
Elton. Obviously Elton John is an owner of Watford FC. He actually told Dee that Brendan Rodgers was going to Celtic before the press even got a whiff of the fact it was going to happen, because he asked him, are you blue or are you green? It's like, I'm green. He's like, oh yeah, Brendan Rodgers is going to Celtic. And he was like, oh really? Which is really interesting. And the final thing was, he spoke to Elton John's manager, and Elton John's manager said to him that Elton John has not been nervous for a gig in about 30 odd years, apart from Glastonbury. But he was actually really nervous for the show.
I can believe that.
That's pretty sweet.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's really interesting, the things that you learn from people that hang out with Elton John.
Absolutely. Seems like a nice enough wee guy. I was saying, like,
his band are lovely as well. So they're all really lovely people.
He's got that rep for buying records in towns that he goes to and then contacting people when he likes their records and stuff. That's
so cool, man.
Yeah. And actually, he's also known because he contacted Lewis Capaldi when Lewis Capaldi it became known that he was struggling with Tourette's and also with the pressures of fame. And that would actually be my next point to take away from Glastonbury this year, because he was clearly having quite a bad time. He's Tourette's on stage, and I think most people think that the audience's reaction to it and stuff was really, really heartwarming. His reaction to it, and he's since announced time out from live performance. I haven't seen the documentary about him. Vicky had said that she really enjoyed it, found it really insightful. I know there are mentions in it about childhood trauma relating to the death of an aunt. I personally don't even know that that's necessary to explain the Tourette's. Not that I'm any kind of expert on it, but the sheer fucking stress that boy's under, the velocity of his rise to fame, you know, how steep it's been, the demand for him and the demands put on him, they need to also be up for it, because his persona is, I think, very honest. Whenever he goes on shows, he's expected to be funny. It's actually a really fucking hard thing to be, as we can testify to in the show. But everyone expects Lewis Capaldi to be Lewis Capaldi. It's like you book him and he doesn't crack jokes, is like booking Biffy Clyro and Simon Neil doesn't take his shirt off. You know, it's like, I think that is unbelievably stressful, and so the fact that the guy is suffering, it doesn't surprise me one bit. And he's, look, the boy's doing really well for himself, but also he's clearly struggling, and taking time out seems like a really good shout.
It's great that there's awareness of that these days, because you know how it would have went in the old days.
Drugs.
yeah, drugs, alcohol, and total self-destruction.
Just a management medicating him like half of the metal bands in the 80s.
Yeah.
Another one, Rick Astley.
I did actually see Never Gonna Give You Up really drunk Saturday night. I actually watched it when we came in for the pub. No, Sunday night when we came in for the pub in Krakow. And yeah, he seemed good patter actually.
80s legend has enjoyed something of a cultural renaissance, or can we call it a Rick Renaissance? Dave Grohl played a part in that Rick Renaissance, because obviously Rick rolling, and then they actually brought him out when they were Rick rolling during the Foo Fighters concerts, Dave Grohl, because obviously he has to be involved in it. So Rick Astley played the Pyramid stage, also included drumming really rather well on an AC/DC cover. I don't know if you saw that.
No.
You got to check that out. Then he also appeared with a band called Blossoms, Blossoms for down south, to do Smiths covers where he sang with them.
That's cool.
Yeah, that also went down really well.
Johnny Marr was there as well. She played with the Pretenders, for the Dave Grohl.
Dave Grohl came out and drummed with them as well, yeah. Dave Grohl, we're about to talk about him. The only other thing I want to flag up is that Alex Turner absolutely fucking butchered one of my favourite Arctic Monkeys songs, Cornerstone, which we gave a lot of time when we did the Arctic Monkeys episode. He did that thing where a song's so familiar, he came out and sort of did that lazy lounge version where you drag all the lyrics about 1.5 seconds behind where they normally land, so that all the flow and the punctuation of the lyrics is completely out of sync with the song. It was fucking torturous. It was torturous. I don't know why people do that. I've had this beef with a lot of artists. No! Some of us might only ever get to see this once, and you're fucking shafting us with this inferior fucking version. Awful. Just don't fucking play it. Just don't fucking play it if you're going to butcher it. Anyway, to end, Dave Grohl, because we've got to end on Dave Grohl in this podcast, right? With Guns N' Roses on stage, with a number of people on stage, but with Guns N' Roses on stage.
We're going to bring out a friend. I'd like to bring out Mr. Dave Grohl. Because there's never such a thing as too many guitars.
Anyone that follows our Twitter will also know that I was none too pleased about this. I'm an OG Nirvana fan, and the Nirvana versus Guns N' Roses rivalry, I was quite happy about that. Why did that have to fucking end? I mean, Kurt Cobain is on record as saying that rebellion is standing up to people like Guns N' Roses. Right, Guns N' Roses were the avatar for pompous 80s LA hair metal. And Nirvana and the grunge movement and the alternative rock movement took a fucking sledgehammer to that scene. And it doesn't mean you can't still like Guns N' Roses, but I really enjoyed the fact that there was no love lost. You know, I'll be honest as well, even if it's a kind of kayfabe thing, even if it's just a fucking phony rivalry, just let us have it. Let us have it. The story about this, it was only after seeing Grohl on stage, I was like, well, actually, how the fuck did this develop? The whole thing came to a head in 1982. Apparently, Axl Rose was furious because he'd been trying to get hold of Kurt Cobain to ask Nirvana to go on tour with Guns N' Roses because they wanted to kind of cash in on the cred, I'd imagine. He then took the hump and told a crowd at a show that Cobain and Love were, I think the phrase he used, fucking junkies. It's actually fairly accurate, but clearly not intended to be too flattering. Then later that year as well, 1992, at the backstage at the MTV Awards, I think Courtney Love and Kurt Cobain had made a joke about asking Axl Rose to be the godfather to Frances Bean. And Axl Rose's girlfriend, who was a supermodel, I think her name was Stephanie Seymour, she went fucking berserk. Axl Rose turned around to Kurt Cobain and said, you shut your bitch up or I'm taking you down to the pavement. And Kurt Cobain turned around to Love and said, shut up, bitch. And then And this is kind of the point where I joined, because this is like, I got into Nirvana just after Kurt Cobain died, right? And this was part of the identity of rejecting certain aspects of chauvinism and machismo in metal and hard rock. 1993, Kurt Cobain does an interview with The Advocate, it's an LGBT magazine. He has a quote, "Axl is a fucking sexist and a racist and a homophobe, and you can't be on his side and be on our side. I'm sorry that I have to divide this up like this, but it's something you can't ignore, and besides, they can't write good music." And for me, I fucking loved that. I know some of it was petty, I know some of it was just Kurt Cobain being a fucking brat, but also Axl Rose was, for what it's worth, fairly fucking sexist and seemingly kind of homophobic and definitely a little bit racist. So yeah, fuck Axl Rose. I always quite liked that there was a sense of otherness to that movement. It felt quite special because hair metal became the establishment. All of the big labels, all the big industry was built around that bullshit, and it was nice that they were taking a fucking axe to that. I don't think Dave Grohl ever really bought into that rivalry though. He's got a couple of interviews, he's got quotes saying, so Axl had been calling Kurt non-stop. One day we're walking through an airport and Kurt says, "Fuck, Axl Rose won't stop calling me." I think it represented something bigger. Nirvana didn't want to turn into Guns N' Roses, so Kurt started talking shit in interviews and then Axl started talking back. It went back and forth like 10th grade bullshit. Interesting thing that I didn't know was that apparently Cobain and Duff McKagan met days before Kurt Cobain killed himself.
Did you not know that?
No, it was almost friendly circumstances.
Yeah, it was on plane, aye.
Yeah, Cobain had been in rehab, he'd escaped from rehab, he'd got a plane, and Duff
He was the last person to see him alive,
Duff McKagan was at the airport, yeah. Duff McKagan said that Cobain, quote, seemed happy to see him, and also made a comment that he did know that something wasn't right though about the way he was acting. He says, "We were talking about what it feels like to be going back home," and that's what he said he was doing, going home. I think Duff McKagan also said that he was trying to offer Kurt a lift home, but then he'd actually just left the airport in a fucking hurry and say he wasn't able to catch him. So I do know that Duff McKagan was from Seattle, right? So he was pretty friendly with like some Mudhoney and a lot of the bands on that scene. But I definitely, by the time he was in Guns N' Roses, there was no fucking love lost with Nirvana. And I think Duff McKagan was particularly furious about some of the things that Cobain had said in a couple of interviews. So that was the first time I think they met in civil terms. But yeah, interesting, another little tidbit that after the news of Kurt Cobain's suicide broke, Matt Sorum of Guns N' Roses was one of the first people to phone Dave Grohl. Dave Grohl had said that after Kurt died, one of the first phone calls I got was Matt Sorum. He left a message and said, "Man, I'm really sorry and I hope you're doing well." I thought that was really cool. Yeah, and then on the 17th of May 2022, I think, Duff McKagan was launching his second book, which I think is called How to Be a Man and Other Illusions. It was joined on stage by Chris Novoselic. They talked about the book and then played Sweet Child of Mine with Chris Novoselic on accordion. But yeah, like I said, man, Dave Grohl going in that stage with a fucking bloated Axl Rose with that fucking weird frog voice that he's got now because he can't do the proper voice, and then Slash, who clearly didn't particularly want to be anywhere near Axl Rose for the majority of the performance. The way Grohl came on and kind of gravitated towards Duff McKagan, stayed in that part of the stage, laughing and joking with him, tried to leave, and then there was just so, it felt so fucking awkward. I'm like, does the world fucking need that shit? Like, as I said in the Twitter thing that I put up, we don't know how Nirvana would have ended up, but I think it would have been closer to something like, I would say, everyone says R.E.M. I don't know if R.E.M.'s accurate. I think they would probably have done some pretty unorthodox things with their music, maybe in the same way as Radiohead, become a little bit curmudgeonly and constantly sceptical about the industry whilst also selling millions of records and release stuff that's a little bit awkward here and there. And, you know, that Tom York vibe is kind of where I think that might have ended up. They wouldn't have become that fucking grandpa circus that Guns N' Roses have turned into. And I just am like, do we fucking need it, Dave? Do we fucking need it? And then the cherry on top of this is that I typed that out, chuckling to myself at like about 5 to midnight on Monday night, went into work on Tuesday morning, and at about 5 to noon on Tuesday morning, fucking Guns N' Roses walk into my fucking work. I had no idea they were playing in Glasgow. The first fucking thought in my fucking mind was, they really didn't like that fucking tweet, did they? How far is that's like Metallica levels of settling vendettas? You know, how far did they travel to fucking tell me they didn't like this? But yeah, no, it turns out they were just playing in Glasgow. It wasn't about me. They didn't know who the fuck I was. It wasn't Axel and Slash anyway. But yeah, there you go. Thought I was about to get fucking smacked in the mouth.
Well, that brings us to the end of our festival season for our season.
The festival season for another season.
Yeah.
It doesn't actually, because there are copious festivals waiting to happen.
Brings us to the end of ours.
What have we got? We've got Transmit coming up, Bloodstock
in Redden and Leeds. August. I'm sure there's others. There are not always going to be others.
Yeah, there's some of the popular ones, like the V-Fest, one of the ones down in Cornwall. Yeah, there's a fucking shitload still coming up.
Mm-hmm.
But are you going to go to any?
Nope.
I might go to Bloodstock.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not joking. I might go to Bloodstock. I might be able to get tickets for it. And I looked at the lineup. My sugar are playing it, and I was like, that might actually be justification enough if I get these tickets. But it's a bit like the Glastonbury thing, where I'm going to be surrounded by maniacs and be constantly paranoid. So
probably, yeah.
But yeah, that was the town hall. If you would like us to discuss a subject, or if you just want to fire questions at us, please feel free to do so. We will put them all in a little bank of Inquisition, and then group them all together and do another one of these, maybe with one of our co-hosts or friends at some point soon.
Yep. Well, we're glad you enjoyed it, and we'll see you next week for some more unsung fun.
Well, I hope you enjoyed it. Catch you later.